Welcome to another episode of the Tor on Air podcast. And today I'm joined by Claudia Sahm. You hear a very German name here. A former Federal Reserve and White House economist, director of macroeconomic research at the Jane Family Institute. In October 2020, I read you also joined the New York Times as a contributing opinion writer. But you also have your own outlet, which is always exciting, a Substack newsletter called Stay at Home Macro, titled Macroeconomics of the People, by the People, for the People. Welcome to the show, Claudia.
Yes, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And you're right, I've had the opportunity to be in a lot of different platforms. At the New York Times, I wrote about the Fed more irregularly now, and at Bloomberg Opinion, I write about inequality. So, and the German name background. So I have lived in Berlin and Dresden, and my kid's dad, he is from Dresden. We live in the US now. So I have lots of connections back to Germany. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. So,
which, by the way, blew my mind that so many people have in the US. I mean, it actually is the #1 ethnicity in terms of ethnic background in the United States. I couldn't believe it. I had to Google it 3 times. But yeah, most people in the US have actually a German ethnic background. So let's get right into it. Today is a big day, an important day, as we're recording this. So, let's keep it as topical as possible. But, keeping in mind that people will listen to this after the Fed made their announcement. But that obviously is, at this moment, in terms of, the interest probably in, of our listeners, and I'm sure also in your work at the moment, just top of mind. So what do you expect is going to happen? And, how does the Fed, see kind of interest rates moving forward?
Yeah, so I think with the Fed, it is helpful to step back and put them in the context of this whole crisis. So the Fed has been in the spotlight since the pandemic really hit the United States and even started hitting the globe. So in March of 2020, they were the firefighter for the global financial system. And we have a lot to thank, not just them, other central banks stepped in, European Central Bank, Bank of England, but the Fed really went in and did their lender of last resort, and they had to stabilize a lot of financial markets, including the US Treasury market, which is one of the largest, most liquid in the world. That was really scary, but they got that job done. They, throughout 2020 and well into 2021, they did a lot to support the recovery, kept interest rates really low. The one that they set, they bought a lot of treasuries, treasury bonds. They also bought mortgage-backed securities. So this is referred to as the quantitative easing. They, kept blasting along with that. Towards the end of last year, and again, this was all eyes on the Fed, they started to slow the purchases, which is referred to as tapering. And all eyes were on Jay Powell to see if he could pull it off without destabilizing global financial markets, which sadly Ben Bernanke did. The first time, they had no precedent of doing the quantitative easing, so I felt a little bad for him. But Jay pulled that off. But the Fed in 2022 is facing the most challenging year, I would almost argue, that they have ever faced. I mean, you can make comparisons to when Volcker took over the Fed, but I feel like in the midst of a global pandemic that we have not seen in living memory, and this combination of inflation is high in the United States and across Europe and many parts of the world. And in the United States, unemployment is low, or has decreased a lot, both from the fiscal policy and the monetary policy. So it's very different than the 1970s, where inflation was high and unemployment was high. Yeah, so the Fed is facing a lot of tough decisions, and the big one, so the meeting that has happened and the vote we will all learn about here shortly from the January meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee. So again, they do this every 6 to 8 weeks. They're meeting today. People are watching the Fed, and no one expects the Fed to raise interest rates today. But what people are looking, and what I spend a lot of time discussing with people in markets, is what will Jay Powell say? What will the official statements say about March? Are they going to raise rates then? Some people think they're going to not just do a little increase, they're going to do like a 0.5 percentage point increase. I think Jay Powell today will say things that set up the possibility of the Fed increasing interest rates for the first time since the crisis began in March. He won't commit to it. The Fed does not tie its hands. And frankly, right now, Omicron and the expiration of a lot of fiscal relief puts a big question mark on what the recovery is going to look like in January and February. We don't have that data yet. They will know a lot more by March, so he's not going to tie his hands. But I suspect by the time he finishes speaking, everyone who has built in a 50 basis point increase in March is going to be unwinding that. Because that would be, and if the Fed wanted to set up that as a possibility, they would start messaging that today. And someone like me who, I worked at the Federal Reserve for 12 years. I was on the staff's forecast and kind of worked my way up in the forecasting. I have a very good, what I like to call Fed decoder ring. Like, not only can I listen to Fed, I can write Fed speak. I know what the words mean. Like, our words actually have a very specific meaning. So when Jay or any Fed official talks, I can hear more than people who've never been inside the building can hear. But markets are like, they have money, they have skin in the game. So they have learned to decode a lot of Fed speak. And Jay Powell he's a very good communicator, right? So we will learn a lot in a few hours from now. But the Federal Reserve does not have a crystal ball. They there's a lot of questions about, is it time for the Fed to not push so hard on the recovery? Like, at some point, they should stop pushing. Really, the Fed is there to make the recessions not as bad as they would be without the Fed and give a nice push to the recovery. But they should, the US economy is a $20 trillion plus economy. The Fed is not there to hold its hand always, right? There are corporations, there's longer term investments that government can make. So, but it's a big question about when the Fed can start to walk away. And they're in the hot seat, and they're going to be all year. And at least as long as inflation in the United States stays above 2%.
And would you say then, the Fed speak, is there kind of, implicit or explicit or, deliberate, way of testing words with the market? And if so, has, the market dynamic that we've seen over the last week, in certain sectors, specifically in kind of high, growth tech companies, which often, are, very much dependent on interest rates, kind of with the whole discounted, future cash flow, underlying fundamental kind of evaluation basis. Like, do you think that what they've seen now take place over the last few weeks may have also changed their mind a little bit around how far they can go?
Yeah, see, I spend a lot of time now talking with participants in financial markets. Like, this was something totally verboten when I was inside the Fed, right? But now, that's just something, there are a lot of people who are interested in understanding the institution and how it thinks. I am always surprised when I talk to how they think about the Fed. It's like I was at a talk, a dinner, and one of the men he's like, so if you had to like pick one thing that the Fed really focuses in on financial markets, what is that thing? And I looked at him and I was like, they don't, right? Like the Fed has, with monetary policy, has a dual mandate of stable prices and maximum employment. Those are not like traded in financial markets. The Fed works through financial markets largely through trying to push around the borrowing costs that consumers and businesses face, but they don't look at what interest rates do to declare victory or not. They look at what consumers do and employers do, right? So it's like, but financial markets, I mean, if you're in whatever job you have, you think like the world revolves around you. Well, actually, like this is not, but they pay a lot of attention. So what I've seen now that I can be on the outside and talk about the Fed and like, what I see, and again, I don't have a crystal ball and I do not talk shop with anybody inside because my decoder ring is too good. Like I don't have to know too much to, know what's going on. And, I don't want to get kicked out of the happy hour, right? Like for misbehaving. But what happens is there's so much uncertainty and people who have big investment, I mean, like money is on the line. And so there is an endless parade of people who will tell you, what's the Fed going to do? What does this mean? And some people are attention seeking, right? Like they say things that I'm like, yeah, there's no way that's right. But I can see why people are listening to you because they're like, whoa, 50 basis point, but what I do when I'm trying to, at the end of the day, the Fed officials have the vote. They are, the board of governors is confirmed by the Senate, the Federal Reserve Bank presidents, like come out of their district, like the banks. So these people have been chosen and empowered with the responsibility of making the decision. So I try hard to listen to them because they're going to interpret, like they're paying attention to financial markets, they're paying attention, but like the Fed in always brings information in. I like to refer to us as like the Hoover vacuum, right? Like we go and bring everything in, not just US market. I mean, like we look internationally, we look at all these, and then there's analysis, right? But in any case, the Fed officials are going to make the decision. So over time, because there's 12 Reserve Bank presidents, and the board, if it is fully staffed, which it's not at the moment, but should be before too long, has 7 governors. Okay, so that's a lot of people, and they all like to talk, right? So there are speeches and news things that happen all the time. But I also know, having been in the building, the order of importance, right? And so that's like what you were, this is a long answer to the question you posed, but by the time that it's in the official statement, or by the time Jay Powell says it at the press conference, the Fed has told us, right? Like it'll start in a governor's speech, and then the vice chair will talk. And every time these people, like the Fed is watching, what is the Fed? And so like-
It's, in Germany, we call it the salami tactic. Have you heard that expression before?
No.
Because you're cutting off little pieces, piece by piece, kind of the truth is being served to, the people.
Yeah.
So you think in a way everything is already priced in.
Well, this is what's interesting. It should be, right? And so like the Fed doing a 50 basis point increase in March, which, I mean, if people don't follow the Fed, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. But usually the precedent, and this does not have to be the case, is when they do increases, they do it in a 0.25 percentage point. And for a very long time, and this was true after the Great Recession, the increases tended to be these quarter. Now, if we go into a crisis, like in March of 2020, they just, I mean, they'll take a 0.5%, a full percent, like they'll just like go down really fast if they think they need to. But they tend to be like slow and steady, as she goes. And so this narrative, like, and I would get asked about in interviews, and I'm like, I don't know what is wrong with like, but I think that's one where the Fed has absolutely noticed the market like doing this. And Jay, he will say things that, I mean, maybe the Fed does want to go there, right? Like we'll hear something today that's either going to set up that that's a real possibility, or it will be like, simmer down, but he's not, like, the Fed is not concerned if market participants lose a lot of money or they gain a lot of money, right? And there's an adage on Wall Street, which I think some of the youngins need to remember: don't fight the Fed. One of their guiding principles is don't surprise markets. They do not like to rock the boat. This taper tantrum when Bernanke kind of surprised, oh, we're going to, kind of move away from supporting the recovery, that was considered like a big mistake. Like, we all make mistakes. They don't have to be perfect. Anyway, but the Fed like tries to signal, like, everybody knows January, they're not raising rates today. But they're gonna like, hey, is it March more likely, or maybe May? Like, it just, so like they really want to hold markets' hands, but sometimes markets don't want their hand held. It's like the, unruly little child that tries to like run off. So it'll be interesting. When Jay talks during the press conference, you can watch the ticker on the markets, the stock market and the treasury market, and they will move on his words if there's a surprise. And I mean, the Fed is like, while he's speaking, there are people in the room that are watching the ticket, so like,
Sure.
I don't know. To me, it's like, it makes me sad, right? Because at the end of the day, the Fed is about inflation and employment. And the people who are in markets and have a lot of money, they're going to be okay, right? Like, I don't worry about the stock market. It will go back up. But the people who the Fed most affects their lives, they have no idea what the Fed is. The Fed doesn't go and talk to them. They don't. And so to me, that's like with my Substack, like, yeah. I want to open up the Fed, not just to market, like, I want to open up the Fed to real people, because you can't hold an institution accountable that you don't understand.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, one thing that, I find, confusing in this whole, discussion, and I think something that seems to be also misconception, or at least a misalignment between what economists say and what maybe, us commoners, hear, believe, think. There's a lot of talk around, QE, for example, leading to inflation. But actually, from what most economists seem to believe, we have a supply side inflation at the moment, and QE may have led to asset inflation, but not really to inflation. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, so when we see inflation or see any price, there's a combination of, there's demand for it, right? Like, people want the stuff. And then there's how much supply do we have? We don't, in the end, especially if consumers or small businesses are going to buy, like, we see the price. The price does not tell us, hey, this is about demand, this is about supply. There are a lot of indications that COVID disrupted supply, whether it's semiconductors we needed from China, or in the United States, I think a lot of countries, our economy was very driven by services. Like, you'd go out to the restaurant, you go get healthcare. And what COVID did is it made a lot of those face-to-face services dangerous. And in some cases, the government at different points was like, no, we're shutting these down. Like that is not happening in the United States now. But I mean, people are legitimately, like, I haven't gone out to a restaurant and eaten inside for a very long time, right? So you can't force people to go out and like do stuff in person, but that's really disruptive in the US economy. That means that like things that are in supply, like a lot of the services people don't want, so it keeps their prices down, and now they just want stuff. Yep. Right? And all of it, you can only, especially with stuff, like you have to produce it, right? So it's caused a lot of problems. So to me,
and there was more money, right? Just for explanation for the audience, there was more money for people to spend chasing kind of fewer goods and services.
Yeah. So I have this discussion with like Jason Furman, who I worked for at the White House, and other economists, lots of, he was an Obama advisor and So in, the federal government did a lot of relief starting in 2020. And then we got to the beginning of 2021 and we weren't recovered and COVID wasn't gone, but like we had made a lot of progress. Vaccines were around the corner. It looked like the economy had a lot of oomph. We'd done a lot of support in 2020. So we came to a place early in 2021, after Biden had taken office, about the American Rescue Plan. So that was another round of stimulus checks. It was more extra jobless benefits. I mean, the United States has a very bad social safety net relative to Germany and basically any other country. And then there were money for state and local government. So it was another $2 trillion package. And it was a very robust debate. I was very much in favor of it. Not during the COVID crisis, according to official survey from the Census Bureau, half of US families had lost income, like employment income, during 2020. If you have that many people experiencing hardship, and most Americans, it's like money in, money out, right? So that's a big deal. And we can't find them, right? And our unemployment system is basically broken, right? So to me, it was like, hey, these people need help. Let's get the money out. After the Great Recession, the Obama administration really did not enough. And now this time, maybe we overdid it, but I'm like, if we're going to make a mistake. Anyway, so there was a big discussion about it. And so now, when inflation is high, there's a big disagreement about how much of that inflation is because of the rescue plan getting more money out and how much of it is COVID. So one of the things that we do that
by COVID, you mean supply chain?
So, well, or just disruptions. They're not just supply chain. It's also this like services to goods switch, which has caused a lot of problems in the labor market. People not feeling safe to go back to work, and schools. Like there's just, COVID is disrupted supply chains, but not just that, right? So one of the things that so Jason and I agree, and other, like, we're not the only ones in this debate, that both demand has pushed up inflation. And some of that very much goes back to the stimulus, right? Like I wanted people so I could spend on stuff. And then some of it is due to COVID. But the supply chain is one that gets talked a lot. So that our disagreement is like, how much?
The ratio.
I think the demand is an issue. I think like on moral grounds or like help it, like I would rather do too much, but I agree it's in there. I just think it's small. I think COVID, like if we do not get out of the pandemic, inflation will not come down, or it'll only come down in a very painful way by like cutting demand a lot. And so one of the things that we do is look at Europe. Like Europe, you all have a much, much better social safety net. But inflation is really high in Europe. And like you all didn't do a rescue plan. Like the United States was one of the only developed countries, like big economies, that did a big push of fiscal at the beginning of 2021. So it's like, if we look across the pond, it's like, well, they have higher inflation, but the US is really not comparable to European countries, and so anyways, you can see why the argument continues. But that fiscal relief is done, right? There is no more money. And in the United States, we also had a child benefit program that was put in place, and it expired at the end of the year. Congress could not get its act together, which meant we threw millions of children back into poverty. And having worked at the Fed for a long time on consumer spending, the biggest predictor of how much people spend is how much income they have. And we pulled the rug out from under a lot of people in terms of income.
We'll get to income inequality, I would say, just in maybe next question. But just to close this loop on sort of QE, I mean, what if you look back to 2008? Because QE is not something that was just now deployed during the pandemic, even though it was maybe deployed at a larger scale than the 2008 financial crisis. But there, it didn't result in inflation. So isn't that also an indicator of?
So first of all, like, the Federal Reserve really doesn't like doing quantitative easing. Ben Bernanke has this quip that, like, quantitative easing works, but we don't know why, right? There's a lot of arguments, even with an academic macro or macroeconomist at the Fed, about how it works, right? How is it that it's pushing the recovery? And financial markets have a very different view of how it actually works in terms of supporting a recovery, right? So if you don't really know how something works, and there's a whole lot of other things going on, it's really unclear what, to me, the direct putting income in people's pockets through the fiscal, if that's got to be the biggest push to inflation. What the Fed has done is, both with quantitative easing, but with its interest rates, is the Fed has stayed out of the way, right? Like, typically, and the Fed did some things with its strategic framework. The way it approaches monetary policy was very much a reflection of mistakes they felt that they made after the Great Recession. But what is unusual about the Fed in 2021 is that they didn't raise interest rates. They didn't switch off the quantitative easing. I mean, inflation is 7% in the United States, right? Like this, and the Fed has not done its first interest rate increase, and it is actually still buying security, right? So this is very unusual. So yes, it has quantitative easing, the Fed trying to keep interest rates low, has absolutely had an effect on demand, like pushing it up. And if demand is pushed up, inflation is pushed up, especially because of problems with supply. I don't think there's a lot of economists that would argue with me that, like, the fiscal policy had a bigger role, but there are plenty of economists that say the Fed is behind the curve, right? Like, they're waiting too long. So the Fed is mixed in with this. It's but the quantitative easing, like, they really don't like. They only do it because once their interest rate is to zero, they can't do any more. They will never do negative interest rates. Like, that is just not something. So they did quantitative easing after the Great Recession. They did it in the COVID crisis. They want to get out of that business as fast as they can. But it's the tool they have. They weren't going to move out. But yeah, they
and probably rightly so, no? Because it has led to a wealth inequality. No, it has further spread that spiral.
It's tough to know exactly what it's doing, but it does appear that, at least to some extent, it is like a side, an adverse kind of side effect of it is some kind of pressure in financial markets that looks like it's raising inequality. But again, there's a lot of things quantitative easing is doing that, like, they're uncomfortable with because they don't really know what it's doing. But yeah, and frankly, this didn't happen after 2008. So it's kind of interesting, but there is a criticism on the left of the Fed that says, look, you're increasing wealth inequality. The decisions you're making backstopping markets are benefiting the wealthy, because you got to have wealth to be in the markets. And so you should raise rates. And I'm just like, whoa. Like, because to me, and I think the Fed agrees with this, their mandate, in particular maximum employment, that is about getting the last people across the finish line. It is not about punishing the top, right? So just because the wealthy are getting wealthier, we shouldn't punish the unemployed workers, because it's not. And actually, in this case, in this recession, the wealth at the bottom has actually increased because the government pushed out so much income, people have saved some. So you have actually seen the bottom 50% of households who have very little, like relative to the top 10, 1%, 10%, but like their wealth has increased. Like everybody's wealth has increased.
Relative,
so it's
yeah.
No, in just dollar term. I mean, it's really amazing.
But like inflation, bereinigt, how we say in German, taking inflation into consideration.
Yeah. I mean, we really pumped that much money out. And actually, if you look at things like consumer spending, which isn't on the wealth side, even after you take inflation into account, consumer spending is just like really increasing. So people, I mean, that's not for everyone. These are aggregates. There are definitely people whose cost of living has outstripped their resources. But it's interesting. Like there's a lot of things happening in the US economy that we frankly have not seen like ever. Right. So it's very like this piece together. But yeah, because the Fed has done unusual things. It did a lot of like lending facilities and backstops to market, like early on, which has an effect on markets. And then this quantitative easing. And that like the Fed is clearly doing something. We don't agree on what it is. And like, I don't know how we could, right? It's really messy. But yeah, the Fed likes, it is a little c conservative institution. Like they don't like flying blind.
But are we measuring the right things when, you talk about kind of increase in wealth, among the lower 50%, even when we look at inflation? I mean, there's, some arguments around, that the basket that we measure is, not really up to date anymore. I think even if I just, look in my, group of, friends, or if you look at, millennials in general, like, buying a house seems, so far away, whereas maybe people with a similar educational level, some decades ago in our age demographic, would for a long time, have maybe, their first house, or like, are we measuring the right things? Do we need to adjust here the definition of,
Yeah, it's complicated. So I think when we think about jobs, I think we do a better job. I think the statistics tell us more, because in, say, the unemployment rate, everybody counts the same. It's like you add up all the workers, people have jobs, people want jobs but don't, and then we take the percent. When we look at inflation or GDP and consumer spending, like there's all these aggregate statistics, not everybody counts the same. Right. So for like the consumer price index, the way you think about it is like there's this huge grocery cart for the whole country. Everybody puts into the grocery cart the stuff they want. Jeff Bezos puts in a lot more stuff into the grocery cart than probably all of his warehouse workers combined. Right. And so then once the grocery cart is full, then our statistical agencies look at the price tag associated with everything in the grocery cart. They compare it this month to last month, or this month to last year. And that's inflation. So what that means in the end is probably very, very few Americans had a 7% increase in their cost of living in 2021. There are some people that had more, there's some people that have less. That basket is it tells us way more about Jeff Bezos' cost of living than it does ours or the person checking out at the grocery store, right? So that's where, and it's unfortunate that our statistics, and we will get some, like they don't come out every month, but surveys where we ask households, what did you buy? And once we know exactly what they bought, the statistical agencies do go out. I mean, like literally, they go to the grocery store and they pick up the stuff and they look at the price tag. So if I knew exactly what you bought, that information on the prices exists, and then I can make your, like, what did your basket cost? But we'll get eventually that data, but we don't have it now. And you'll hear a lot of people like me saying, oh, the inflation hurts the poor and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, the poor got a lot more income in the last year, so they're clearly buying stuff. But we don't have that data. Like we do not have that data. And so it's very legitimate. I mean, one thing we do know from the data, we can look at how much different goods, like the prices increased. So if you did the used cars, this goes back to the supply chain and the computer chips and blah, blah, blah. The increase in used car prices accounts for about 40% of the inflation in 2021.
Wow.
So if you did not buy a used car, and I mean, if you did, you had the money to do it, but if you did not buy a used car, your inflation is, and everything else was like, you know, the regular basket, your inflation was like 4%, not 7%. Right. But by the same token, and the point you were making about housing, if you have to buy a house or you're in an area where you got a job and you have to go rent an apartment for the first time, even if you didn't buy a used car, like your cost of living could have easily increased more than 7%. But before the pandemic, if you'd had to do that, your cost of living went up more than 2%. Right, because we've had a long-standing issue of like housing being not affordable for a lot of people. So it's tricky.
It's interesting, how you always have to look at, you know, the specific demographics. Cities, for example, I saw also, you know, like the inflation is likely higher in, you know, the top cities and, you know, boroughs like Brooklyn, you know, where the hipster, you know, flat white with oat milk, you know, maybe at $7 now.
And all countries are like that. Like the cost of living in Berlin is very different than the cost of living in one of the like Dörfers out in the, you know, so like, so that's why I think it's hard, because the statistics, inflation is 7%, like you hear it, and inflation is a word like taxes. If you hear the word, it does not make you happy. Right, regardless if it's high or low, it's just like, And so what happens in the US, it's like, even if like,
unless you're a house owner,
but they don't call it inflation, they call it house prices, right?
Exactly.
Like most people have a negative response to it. And I mean, prices are always going up. It always is annoying if you go to the gas pump and it's like more than the last time you were there. And the other thing, so it just evokes like fear. But
salaries haven't. Sorry, just you know,
no, go ahead.
Salaries, you know, like haven't risen. I mean, yes, maybe during the pandemic, you know, with the stimulus and so forth. But do you see, you know, the need for further salary increases in Germany? Actually, we're just now discussing also lowering the tax, because the tax rate, you know, has to be somewhat reflected in the, you know, fact that, you know, there is inflation. And you know, the state shouldn't be the one that benefits from inflation.
When I think that's probably very specific for the value-added taxes. I would imagine, because the VAT, the United States doesn't have a VAT, but they do have like taxes on gasoline that they could, you know, turn off, and they have some tariffs.
It's even on income tax.
Oh, it's even on income.
It is actually adjusted. Generally, I think once a year it is adjusted to inflation. But it basically, you know, we haven't fully adjusted it yet.
I see. I mean, there are a lot of levers that government has to address this. Yeah, the thing with wages. So again, it's just like the inflation, like the consumer price index. It's this big basket, right? So some workers get big raises and some don't, and because it's an aggregate, it tells us more about what's happening at the top. Now we do, like, of the wage, just higher wage workers. Now in the employment data that we get, like that's a survey that happens every month, we do get some information on wages, right? So at the worker level, and we have some other data like wages, there's a lot of different sources, but something that has happened in the United States that we have not seen in like forever is we have large wage increases at the bottom, right? So like, and frankly, I think we've gotten to the point that it wasn't even clear that low wage workers could get raises without like companies not being profitable. And there was so much demand because remember, the economy just like totally switched from like services to goods. So there were some, and employers had just laid everybody off early on. So it was like employers were really struggling to get the workers that they needed when they needed. And so, you know, markets work. You raise the wage, you give them a signing bonus, like people will come. And so because of that competition, which I think is very specific to this COVID crisis, and I don't think workers, because we're not unionized in the way that like even Germany is. So, but you can see in the data, the people who did get the increases, they're down at the bottom. A lot of the professional class didn't get 7% raises. I mean, the really top, I'm sure, did. I worry a lot more about the cost of living of low wage service workers than I do of the top 20%. Right. And so this was very unusual, and we can see this, but there's still an argument. Like, I'm sure there are low wage workers who didn't get the raise because maybe they didn't switch jobs, but they bought a used car. Right. So, I mean, we can argue until the cows come home about like how all these pieces fit together. And frankly, for different families, it's going to be different, and how old you are and where you live. Like, but we always have used the aggregates. So I don't want to explain away that 7%. And even if you didn't buy use, 4 is a lot more than 2. And it is really tough. And we know a lot of lower income people spend a lot of their money on necessities. Food has gotten more expensive. Housing is expensive. So like, this is a very serious situation. The federal government, including the Fed, needs to do what it needs to do to get inflation down. So like, I think, and that's I don't know anybody that's like, yeah, inflation's 7%. Like, this is not like, no one thinks that. So,
considering how many topics I want to discuss with you, you know, from crypto to climate to competitiveness of the US to China, etc. I'm gonna get
faster.
to it, and we won't get to everything because I don't want to keep you too long.
But I'll give shorter answers.
But you know, what do you think then? Like, is inflation something that we just over the next, let's say, you know, 2-3 years have to live with, given the fact that China, you know, is still holding on to their zero COVID policy, further, you know, disrupting the supply chain that, you know, we discussed, you know, also has a big impact in prices. Given that, you know, we have committed to a substantial transformation of, you know, the world's economies into, you know, greener economies, and that, you know, seems to be a costly affair that likely will also raise prices. You know, what is your sort of, you know, maybe 1 to 5 year horizon on inflation, and also on, you know, how to tackle it? You know, are we just dialing down QE? Is that enough, or does it also need, you know, interest rates to hike over the next few years?
Yeah, so I do believe, although this has taken longer than I had expected, but I do expect that the pandemic will move into an endemic stage. People will feel safer going back in public, whether it's to work or to go to the restaurants and buy stuff. And I do think that we are going to move into that phase during 2022. So I think by the time we get to the end of the year, we are going to see inflation that is much closer to 2%. Maybe not all the way 2, but I mean 3, which is not 7. We're going to see that. And part of it, like goods prices may still be high. I mean, goods prices used to actually reduce inflation because the quality got better and better. But I think people are going to shift away back towards services, places where the increases are not as high. So I think inflation is going to come down. Now, there are issues with cost of living, right? Like unaffordable housing. It is a problem we had before. In a lot of ways, it's a problem that got worse because of COVID, or just messier, like as people moved around the country. There are, the Biden administration and Congress has talked about a lot of different ideas in what was called Build Back Better. I like to call it kids care and climate, but I mean, they had a lot of things, and the Biden administration has talked about this more and more because inflation is high, more longer term changes that I don't think will be effective at bringing inflation down right now, like quickly. I think COVID will bring it down quickly. But they would, over the longer term, help lower the cost of living, like make house prices go up less, make rents more affordable, right? So I think largely there are things that they could do to bring down the cost of living and how fast it's increasing. Like that technically is inflation, but it's kind of a different, like it's not a like every month kind of thing. It's like over years.
Also, because I think it only represents a third of the basket of the consumer price index.
Yeah, it's,
and
you
maybe
know, it's
many people spend more than that on.
Yeah, it's a little like housing. Frankly, the CPI or the Fed targets what's called the personal consumption expenditure in like price index. They're really not the data you want to look at to think about housing affordability. They're in there, but that's not, you know, so, but you asked about climate, right? Because I said there's a lot of things the administration, Congress, like lower the cost of living if they get them passed. I'm not holding my breath. But there are things like moving the US economy away from all this consumption of oil and gas and things that we know are causing problems like global warming. Those, most of them would increase in some way the cost of living, particularly until people have adjusted, right? Like getting gas prices up, part of that is so that people get electric cars. But until they get electric cars, that's going to raise the cost. And it's kind of the intention, right? This is one of the many reasons that the United States is way behind in policies to address climate change. And frankly, I think the world will be on fire before the United States takes a really serious, and it's really unfortunate. I think this administration is trying. They have basically until the end of this year, and it's pretty clear that with senators like Joe Manchin from states that are, it's not going to happen. So, you know, but it's not like, there are various ways to move on climate change. Some states like California are much more aggressive, right? So it's not like the entire United States is lost to the cause. But I do think it's the cost of living, the jobs, right? Like that is a big impact. It's not like the United States wants the world to burn, right? It's just who gets hurt, who benefits. But if we do not act to contain climate change, the cost of living in the United States will rise because natural disasters and things will happen, you know, so like there is no getting away from the fact that climate change is going to increase the cost of living. It's just whether Mother Nature is going to do it or Congress is going to do it. As we see with COVID, COVID's in control. COVID is a dress rehearsal for our climate change disaster, a global one. and we are not doing a good job. And so,
so then
yeah.
on rates, you don't think we'll necessarily see, long term, or let's say short to midterm, whatever your definition is of short to midterm, but let's say 1 to 3 years, the need to continuously raise rates.
Yeah, no, the Fed is going to raise interest rates. Again, like they're not in the business of pushing the US economy all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, by the end of this year, not by the end of this year, definitely by the end of next year, we ought to be at interest rates, the federal funds rate. The Fed does not control all interest rates, but their interest rate, the one that is very short term and banks borrow at, it's going to be back to what it was before COVID. It might even be higher. I mean, the economy is like growing, like there's more strength. We'll see what jobs do with unemployment, but like it should go back up. I think this year, I don't know if it's March or it's May, like the Fed should be raising interest rates. Unemployment is really low. Like and inflation is high, right? So there's a big debate about how many times they're going to raise it and blah, blah, blah. But frankly, we don't know right now. The Fed doesn't know right now because we'll keep getting data and we'll learn more. But I see it as the Fed is going to start raising rates for a good reason, because they've accomplished their job or as best that they can. Some people are like, oh, the Fed is behind the curve and they need to raise rates. And to them, it's like a bad reason, like inflation is high. But I'm like, there are two sides of this coin, so, but we both agree interest rates are going to go up.
Yeah.
But like I joke with some other smart, actually, these are former Fed people. They're like, interest rates are going to go up this year and inflation is going to come down, but those two are probably not going to be all that related.
Okay.
And so I was like, yeah, because I think
which I guess in the field of macroeconomics is often this predicament, like, you just can't run these isolated experiments and just taking out one variable, run the experiment twice to kind of get, to the proof and testing your hypotheses, right?
Yeah, it's gotten better because we have more and more detailed data. Like we don't always have it in the moment. We've gotten a lot more of varying qualities. So there are parts of macro that have become much more like micro in that they can run, but it's not the same. It is not experimental and nothing is settled in macro. Jason Furman and I will argue about the rescue plan until the day we both die. Right, like this is just, and I know this, and this is how this works,
and you will enjoy it, maybe even.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is what I do.
So, I want to let you go very soon, so just two more fields. Let's talk technology.
Okay.
So, us in the technology industry, we like to make this claim that productivity gains with technology will only grow exponentially. And that would also, I guess, have a downward, pressure on prices. Is that a sentiment that you agree with? Before we get into crypto, but just generally from a,
Yeah, no, I'm rooting for you all. Yeah. Right. Like in the United States, productivity growth had slowed. And actually had been slowing since probably around 2000. This is a huge problem. Even like a 1/4 percentage point on growth, on productivity growth, compounded over like productivity is the holy grail of the economy, not just like economic policy. I mean, just like it's better. Like we should try and have it be more equitable. So we raise all boats, but like raising the boats is good. Technology, I mean, there's just so many good things about it, but I won't run through all of them. Well, other than it's hard, right? Like it is really hard to increase the ability of a $20 trillion economy to get more out of less, right? But it can be done. We have had times where this has happened. But one like kind of direct effect of technology is for many of the goods in particular that are in the inflation measures, they do a quality adjustment. right? So like prices will actually fall because say, the iPhone, the mobile phones are in the basket.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the mobile phone gets faster and faster and can do more and more. And they actually like do the price indexes on some of the things inside of the phone.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the computing power gets better. So there's actually this and they should, right? Because like my phone can do so much more than my phone could do even like 5 years ago. Anyway, so there's this very direct, it's in the measures, but I mean it's like real, right? And actually technology people think inflation is way overstated because everything they're doing is the best thing since sliced bread. I mean, but so there's that. So and the private sector, businesses have been the engine of growth, like always. Like the private sector is huge, the government is small. The government does a lot of good things with the infrastructure. I have a lot of trouble with people like Peter Thiel and some of the tech people that are like, government is horrible. And it's like, no, see, you're using all of the things government put in place. But at the end of the day, it's like the government can help set the stage. Have it be an even stage, have it do the things like the public goods, build the roads and the bridges, the internet across the entire country. But it can't, and I think this is good in the United States, we don't do a lot in terms of picking winners and losers. There are some parts of the economy, I think, particularly in the tech space, we're going to talk about crypto in a minute, where the government doesn't, like the private sector moves faster than the government. So there are spaces that tech firms get into that really aren't very regulated. It's a little bit wild, wild west. And so they can be more creative in good ways and bad ways. But like that's, the United States prides itself on being a market economy. President Joe Biden, as he gave a 2-hour-long press conference last week and talked about inflation and Russia and lots of stuff. I mean, at some point early on said, I am a capitalist.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so that's the dynamic of the US economy. That means that I think technology companies, it is not random that the United States has some of the biggest tech centers in the world, because that's, but like I said, it's hard. It's hard to innovate in a way that affects millions and millions of people's lives.
And I guess it's also, technology, may often, have this perceived productivity gain by just, automating things, but that also automates jobs away, right? Like that's not, the helpful productivity we want, no?
Yeah, so I'm a little, okay, so I grew up on a farm in Indiana. And by the time the farm ended, it was not like 5 years ago, it was a 4th generation farm. Okay, so in that time, when my great-grandfather started the farm, a lot of people were farmers. It was actually kind of a good thing during the Great Depression to be growing your food, right? But like the tractor that my grandfather, so not even great-grandfather, because they had like mules and horses, like with doing the corn. The tractor that my great-grandfather, that my grandfather and then my dad used some when they were farming. When I was a kid, we used that as a lawnmower. Okay. And then my dad, I went to this, and as time goes on, like with more and more technology, there were fewer and fewer farmers, right? Because even the lawnmower could move a lot faster than the mule could, right? So then when my dad, like I went to a farm, like at the state fair with him, and they had like an old tractor section. Okay, so we saw the tractor that my dad had used, like when he was, in middle age, like really running the farm. And then like I knew the farm that was sitting, or the tractor that was sitting at home that my brother used. Like these are like not even the same kind of tractor. I mean, they're so much more powerful. But that every generation that my family stayed in farming, they had fewer and fewer other farmers. Like, and the family farm ended in 4 generations. And frankly, there just aren't a lot of family farms left. But that was good. Farming is a horrible job, right? Like I would go out and help with the pigs and I would smell like hog manure Like, this is not popular when I hang out with my friends. Like, no matter how much you scrub, you still smell like pig poop. So like, and it's a backbreaking job. It's all hours. So frankly, and my brother's a good example. He's in his 30s. He finally said enough with this farm. Like, it just was too. He took a job in construction sales. He is making more money than he did before. He doesn't smell like hog manure. Like, it's just, there are always jobs. Like, the US economy changes. And frankly, what we have automated away are some of the worst jobs. Now, some people won't be able to make the change like my brother did. And I do a lot of work on like social safety net. And I don't think we should leave people behind. And older workers, like my dad wouldn't have been able to make the jump, but he's old enough. He has Social Security. It was fine. So these transitions can be very hard on some workers. The government can do a better job of those transitions. And I think if you look at the US history, we've done a good job with that. Not always, but like, and so there's a lot of jobs I want automated away. These are bad jobs. They're better jobs.
One area of the economy that crypto, according to one of the most prominent investors in the space, Lasse Klausny, was on the podcast a few episodes ago, and he said that crypto is basically going after the trust function of the economy, which, according to some studies, represents almost 30% of the entire U.S. economy. And by trust functions and institutions, this is like banks and insurers, notaries and lawyers and all these type of functions that help coordinate and build and establish trust among all the participants of the economy. So let's talk crypto.
Yeah.
What is your thought on the industry in general? And before we went into recording, you had a hopeful comment to make around sort of the interest of the government and the way that it maybe end up dealing with the crypto industry.
Yeah, I mean, crypto is here, right? Like early on with Bitcoin, but it, like this is, it's absolutely clear that crypto, other digital currencies are going to be a store of value. Like, this is a way people are holding wealth. I think it's much less clear how much crypto is going to be used for like buying stuff, right? Like currency. I think we have digital currencies, but there's a whole like exactly what crypto is and what it does, but it's clear crypto does something that people want because it's gotten bigger and bigger. So, and this is a place where the government will catch up, right? Like, it kind of let the tech kind of run for a little bit, but clearly now it's like, no, we gotta pay attention to this and regulate, put some guardrails up. Now, to this, I think it's very interesting. I hadn't heard it referred to as like moving into the trust space. And my message to anyone who is working in crypto, do not screw this up. Right, because the United States has like trust has been eroded in our institutions like over time, and we don't need like less. So, but I do think, and tying it just really quickly back to the thing about automation, some of innovations like crypto have the potential, and I think really are already automating out some of our professional jobs. Most technology and automation has happened with lower wage jobs. Sometimes there's outsourcing to foreign countries, but like really it's hit towards the bottom. It's taken away the bad jobs. Crypto kind of automation, like an accountant is a well-paid job. A bank executive is a well-paid job. You could be taking away jobs people like, they're good jobs. Right. But I think, I'm an economist. I believe in markets. I think technology, because I said before, productivity growth, holy grail. Right. And the financial system does not work for everyone. Like, for me, the upside of crypto and digital currencies is the opportunity to improve financial inclusion. Right. Because I think there are there are many consumers, the unbanked, the underbanked, who are not well served by the banking system. They're frankly like too costly for like traditional like they're not good customers. They don't have a lot of income. It comes and goes and blah blah blah, and they have some real trust issues with banks. And so I think I'm really excited about some of the potential with the digital currency to do good. Fintech is another one that's in that, but I don't think we're going to have a net positive on financial inclusion unless the government has created some guardrails, because like, you know, they're not the best customers either for like a crypto kind of space.
And will they create their own digital currency?
The Fed?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think.
But are they capable? I mean, it's also, I mean, technologically, I mean, I'm not an engineer, but, you know, considering how long Ethereum, for example, you know, has been added, and, you know, how many tens, if not hundreds of thousands developers have contributed to that code. I mean.
Yeah, don't bet against the Fed.
Okay.
Right? I mean, like, they print money. Of course, they're going to be able to hire the people they need. And the Fed doesn't. There are a lot of questions about how it will actually roll out and the extent to which a central bank digital currency, so the CBDC, particularly with a Fed, it is unclear right now. And the Fed just released a report on digital currency that touches like crypto, and it's very like Fed like. It's just very fuzzy, but they've opened up a comment period, a formal comment period. The Fed is going to move as slowly and deliberately as it can, but it is like the world of crypto is moving so fast, and you have places like the Chinese central bank has been clear. They want, so like the Fed has no choice. If China moves in, the Fed has to move in, right? So it's unclear exactly what the structure will be. It's unclear how much it will go through the pipes of the banking system or not. I mean, crypto doesn't, those aren't their pipes, right? And it's unclear how much they're going to, again, the Federal Reserve could set up their like digital currency, a crypto, like if we had Fed coin, they can set it up in a way that they basically take the market, right? Like there's a US dollar, and like there aren't like little douche dollars, right? Like, so they can either set it up so the Fed becomes the main currency, and then you just have these side players, like if you're trying to launder money or something, you know, or they can create a space, which I think is frankly more likely, where they are a big player, but they're not the only player. I mean, frankly, it'd be tough because these crypto, this is like a global effort. This is not just a US. So I think, but these are big questions, and they're trying to figure out what crypto is and the digital, and there's so much innovation going on in that space. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question, including people that are up to their nose doing crypto stuff, because there's always like this new thing. So I think it's going to be really exciting. I think there are huge upsides to it. I think the Fed and other regulators are going to try to limit the downsides with a focus on the US consumer, right? And to some extent, the investors, because they don't want... there are really big movements in some of the cryptocurrencies that I think the Fed would perceive as risk to financial market stability. Like you see something like Bitcoin in a weekend plummeting double digits, like that is not, like you wouldn't want Fed coin to do that over the weekend. Like that would, so I think there's just a lot of challenges, but like the Fed is extremely capable, and they will hire all the people. So like if you're in this and you want to work in the federal government, there will be job opportunities.
And it seems unavoidable, also considering, you know, how much this generation will inherit, you know, Gen Z, Gen Y, you know, there's going to be a huge wealth transfer. from the boomers.
At some
And
point.
I could imagine a lot of those will want to invest into crypto. So that's
Yeah,
definitely what
no,
we are
and
betting on. Yeah.
there were
I let you go
stimulus
now.
checks.
Last question.
Yep.
I mean,
Mhm.
just to kind of tie it all up. I mean, looking out, what makes you hopeful? You spoke about productivity being the holy grail. Like, shouldn't education play a much bigger role than in all of our government's activity and even in the private sector? Are we doing enough here? And what's sort of the future that you foresee? Like, if we become this hyper productive society, will we have to have UBI, universal basic income, to kind of keep a social peace? And just give us like your long-term
Yeah.
view on some of those topics.
Yeah, totally easy question here to wrap it up with. Yeah, no, I think so. To me, as someone who did a lot of forecasting, I run out scenarios, and I've been trained to kind of do most likely a downside, an upside. I think with longer term growth, so I'm a macroeconomist by training, which means by training, I am pessimistic, but I'm also like a person. And when I look out to the future, I think I'm intrinsically optimistic, right? I do a lot of work to support the next generation. Like, I do a lot of it in the profession, but just more broadly, because like, if anybody's going to save us from things like climate change and other like, it's them, right? Like, it's going to be passing the boomers are not going to save us, and frankly, my generation won't be the ones to get it across the finish line either. So I think and I do look at technology. Again, the United States has had a lot of innovation. I think we're not done in a lot of the internet, the financial system. I don't think we've been able as a country as a whole to really tap in to the innovation. And frankly, I think some of the innovation is ridiculous and we won't tap into, but that's what, like, you need a sandbox where there's a lot of stuff going on. And I see that. I think, I am optimistic even over the next few years. And I think getting us out of the COVID crisis with a minimal amount of damage, right? We have unemployment as low. That gives a good springboard for technology. The years after the Great Recession, business investment was low. People didn't have money in their pot. Like, you build and you expand when there are people to buy your stuff. Like, if people don't have living wages and they don't, like, I wouldn't invest too much, right? Like, so I think we have a better like launching pad. And I think there's a lot of exciting, I mean, not just in internet, I mean, like pharmaceutical, like there's just a lot of things. There's a lot of technology we need. Climate is a perfect example. People, I forget what my libertarian economist friends call it, but like, instead of like the US making, like the oil and gas more expensive, you can have technology that makes the green energy less expensive. So you can kind of like use technology to get us out of this mess of climate change, because we won't have policy that does it. Because I am so pessimistic about the United States passing any kind of climate policy. I am like, come on, it's like, come on, technology. My brother's an engineer in the Bay Area, and I'm just like, please, and works on some alternate foods. In any case, like, if for climate in particular, if technology does not save us there, we are in big trouble. But like, technology goes where the money is, right? So it's not clear to me. So I think over the longer run, I'm very much an optimist. I'm about the private sector and technology. My pessimism comes from like, we have so much inequality. And I think a lot of tech innovation gets pointed at the 1%. And if we pull this apart, like there are a lot of like societal issues, right? The polarization, the lack of trust in institutions. Like, I can spin a really bad scenario for the United States. And like, that could even be like in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
And the United States is the largest economy in the world. China's getting close. And it is a leader still in foreign policy and all this stuff. Like if the United States goes off the rails and it's not in a good, we have a big, big problem. And the economy, inflation, this is not going to be what people want to talk about. Right. So I don't know. So I think we've got like these two paths. Frankly, like I said, I'm more of an optimist, but no, as I'll leave with the closing on this. At the Fed, I did a lot of forecasting. We like to joke that after 2 years out, a monkey can do as well as we can, because you're just throwing darts. And so then you think like out 10 years, 20 years, there's no forecast. It's just like doing. Like it'll depend,
And then we just finish on a lighter, note. Like, is there a book that you, often give to people that want to learn more about, the economy or, where we're headed? Is there a period that you look at? I have a friend of mine who's an economist, and, when he wants to draw the pessimistic scenario that you were also alluding to, he reads a lot about the Gilded Age, because he says, that's maybe a time period that we can, learn a lot from. Any book recommendation?
Yeah. So actually what I would say is not the books, unless you're really like into books. And then you're going to have a lot, like I have a whole bookshelf of Fed books, right? So you're just going to have to like really go all in. I think this is a golden age of economic journalism, right? So if you just want to read the page, like these people are just really good. Sometimes they're better than economists, the ones I talk to. And then there is a very vibrant space of online, like the Substacks, the blogs. I love Twitter, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't, but it's just like information is flying all over the place. If you are good at filtering, right? Because not all information is as useful, but if you are good at filtering, finding people who are experts in the area, and then not creating an echo chamber. I mean, we can do that with our bookshelves too, like just go buy the books that like, but I think, and to me, because the world is moving so fast, and I mean, a lot of the audience, if you're in tech and crypto, like we can't write the books fast enough. And the people that are in the space, like, I have an editor's like, oh, you should write a book about this and that. I was like, I have too much to do. Like I am working in this moment. I'm just not going to stop. Right. Yeah. So, and I think that the people that have that attitude, they're the ones that are pushing the frontier. So that's where I spend the most of my time. I do read some books. I like history. I think we know more. I think it's important to understanding today to know where we came from.
Yeah.
But that I would say, whatever you're most interested in, like if you do crypto, go read some books on the history of money, right? So that you understand, like crypto is not a new thing, like this is just a new form of it. So I think it's very specific to your area, but otherwise, if you just want to get a sense, like get online. So.
And we'll follow you. You're Claudia_Sahm, SAHM, on Twitter. And of course on Substack with Stay at Home Macro. Yep. Claudia, thanks so much for spending the time with me today.
Thank you.
And all the best, and hopefully check in with you soon.
Yeah, sounds great. All right, thanks.
Bye now.